Hello, welcome to Just the Dis, where we talk about Blu-rays. And this should be a quick video, but I just wanted to talk about some stuff that I got. Paramount Home Entertainment sent these over. We got a bunch of Eddie Murphy. Whoops, let's try this way. Bunch of Eddie Murphy on Blu-ray and 4K. All new transfers. So that's very exciting stuff. And these are all kind of childhood favorites for me, so it was a pleasure to revisit and go through some features on these and kind of just generally absorb some stories behind these films that I love. But let's start with the classic. I mean, they're all classic, but the big one for me is Beverly Hills Cop. This is an early R-rated movie for me, one of the big ones I remember as a kid, and I think we watched it on VHS when it came out as a family. And I was still pretty young at the time, but we liked Eddie Murphy. I had seen him in SNL. SNL was in that period when he was part of the cast, when I was really starting to have an interest in watching SNL, just staying up late. It was like the forbidden fruit of late night comedy television. And so it was a blast for me to see him in movies after I'd seen him on the show, because he is an incredible performer. He's a great actor. He's a great improviser, and Axel Foley is one of the great characters of the 1980s. This is one of the great films of the 1980s. It is obviously about a Detroit cop who has one of his friends killed basically in front of him, and then he decides to sort of try and figure out, piece together who was responsible for his friend's death. And that leads him out to Beverly Hills, where he clashes with the police department, and makes a whole lot of trouble, and is incredibly funny and charming. And you can see why this movie was a big hit. But some great features on this. The 4K transfer looks really good. I mean, it's just really crisp, and all of these have nice film grain to them, and I was just really kind of loving this. Just, it's not like that eye-popping Flash Gordon. That's not the palette we're talking about here, but ultimately this looked great. And I was checking out the commentary track, which I'm not sure. I think that's an older track, but it doesn't matter because it plays like brand new. And this is not the first time I've seen this feature, I don't think, or I mean, I've never used it before, but this has commentary subtitles, which is great. So you watch the movie and you can actually put the commentary subtitles on, so you can see what Martin Brest is saying as you watch the movie. And I think I heard Blade Runner has this, and a couple other discs have it. I've just never used it, and it was great. I was just that much more engaged with the commentary track, and it's a really neat track. There's tons of great stories that Martin Brest tells. I just love Martin Brest. I think he's a great director. Between this and Midnight Run and Going in Style, those are three comedies that I think are just outstanding comedies, and so I kind of would love to see him back in the director's chair at some point. But anyway, it was lovely to hear his recollections of this. He was talking about so much different stuff, but one thing that stood out to me is he was speaking about Gil Hill, who plays Eddie Murphy's boss, his chief, whatever, at the Detroit Police Department. And I guess he was a real cop that Martin Brest saw somewhere and asked him if he wanted to audition, and he said he would. And apparently that audition wasn't very good, but either Martin Brest worked with him or he worked on his own, just practicing and practicing, and he got better and better and better. And he's one of the highlights of the film. Like, he's not in it very much, but in the few scenes he's in, it's so dynamic, and he's so great against Eddie Murphy. And Martin Brest talks about like a father-son kind of scenario, that they almost seem like that kind of a relationship in a way. But it's just really neat to see a real person of that vocation playing the part, and he is great. I never would have thought he wasn't an actor, you know, because he's so good in it. And like the scene in the locker room at the beginning of the movie, always remember that. Anyway, so he talks about Gil Hill a lot. He talks about all kinds of stuff. It was a really great track. And as I said, I recommend it with the commentary subtitles because I was just absorbing it that much more, as I said. He mentioned about the set for the Beverly Hills Police Department. This was funny to me. That, you know, apparently he was working on War Games and he was fired off of War Games, which is a story I hadn't heard exactly what I want to look into. But apparently, since they had worked up some, he and his production designer had worked up some designs for the control room in War Games, they kind of used some of that stuff that they had developed as the police department set in Beverly Hills Cop and the Beverly Hills Police Station. And I thought that's super cool. And when you watch the movie, you can see it. It does look like some kind of, you know, I don't know, control room. It's just really cool. But it really contrasts with the Detroit Police Department and how that, you know, police station looks. And anyway, it's just a wonderful film. He was also talking about Taggart and Rosewood being sort of modeled after Laurel and Hardy, and I see that a lot more when I was watching it this time, just little things that they do and the way they antagonize each other. Anyway, love this movie, and it also has some deleted scenes, some behind-the-scenes interview from '84, something called Beverly Hills Cop, The Phenomenon Begins, a glimpse inside the casting process, the music of Beverly Hills Cop. Oh, it has something called BHC Mixtape, which is basically you can look at a list of songs that are used in the film and click on the song and go watch that scene that includes that song, which is a neat little function. So I like that. But yeah, this is really nice. I was really excited to get this one, honestly. One of my favorite 80s comedies and just one of my favorite 80s movies. Next up, we have another 4K. This is a Steelbook, Coming to America, which is, as you may know, getting a sequel, which I believe is coming to Amazon later this year, which I'm very curious to see. This one was a big deal to me as a youth also. I thought it was very funny and very entertaining. And, you know, it's the story of this prince from a little country called Zamunda. There was also, I guess, in the commentary, or no, one of the interviews with Landis and the writers, they were saying that they almost called the country Zamuda after Bob Zamuda, Andy Kaufman's cohort. But Landis nixed that and said that he would rather call it Zamunda. So that's where Eddie Murphy comes from. And apparently when he pitched the idea, all he had was sort of the opening, which I still think is great. Just the setup of Zamunda and the prince and his daily routine and how he can't even go to the bathroom by himself, and he has to have women dropping rose petals at his feet whenever he walks, as does anybody in the royal family. And he is to marry his arranged princess, but he decides he wants someone who will love him for himself and not for who he is. And so he wants to go to America and find his own princess. And he does that, and he goes to the logical place to look, which is Queens in New York. And he brings along Semi, his sort of sidekick dude, if you will. That's Arsenio Hall. And it's just a lot of fun to see this fish out of water in America comedy, you know, and all the colorful characters that he encounters. Just a really sweet movie, a fairy tale, but, you know, a raunchier one and a very funny one. And like I said, directed by John Landis. I've got another Landis movie in this pile. And so this is their second movie that they did, Landis and Eddie Murphy. And yeah, no, this is a solid one. And I really like some of these features it actually has. Well, I should say that, again, the 4K transfer looks good. I think I like the Beverly Hills Cop transfer a little bit more. I mean, that's not to say that they were shot in the same way or they're even having the same, I mean, California versus shooting, I assume in the Midwest for coming to, or I'm sorry, in New York for Coming to America, will make a difference in the sort of color palette of the film. But This also has nice grain to it, and I was impressed with the transfer, which is a new scan, as is the Beverly Hills Cop, as are all of these new 4K scans. But this has some good features on it. It has something called Principal Photography, the Coming Together of America, Fit for Akeem, Costumes of Coming to America, Character Building, The Many Faces of Rick Baker. That's my favorite one. It's an interview with Rick Baker and Eddie Murphy and Landis, and they talk about all the different makeups that Rick Baker ended up creating for this movie, and it's really remarkable stuff. And that's one of the reasons I love the movie, is I kind of love multiple roles in a movie where one actor plays more than one role. In this case, Eddie plays at least 3, and Arsenio plays at least 3. There might be more actually than that. I think Arsenio might have a couple more, and they just pop up all over the place. And the makeups are so good that, obviously the big one that always shocks people is the sort of older Jewish white guy that he makes Eddie into, that is in the barbershop. And that just was like, when they say at the end of the movie, you're just like, and Eddie Murphy, and everybody was like, what? And it's so incredible. You get to see him sort of making and sculpting that makeup and talking about, how he went about that stuff. I just love that the guy who did, American Werewolf in London can also do these great character building makeups that make those performances feel different and allow for the actors to really develop the characters beyond, something very slight, So I don't know. I really dug that a lot. But yeah, this has got just 4K and digital, and that's it. This one has a Blu-ray and digital as well. But good stuff, and it was fun to revisit this, and I'm very much looking forward to the sequel. Next we have, first time on Blu-ray, The Golden Child from 1986. And this one has like a special place for me because, like I said, I was just a big Eddie Murphy fan. I got into his stand-up, and I used to listen to Delirious on tape all the time. Like, it was like my go-to thing when I was a teenager. Before I go to sleep, I'd listen to one or the other of his. I don't think I listened to Raw as much, and I think I taped them off like TV, like our tapes of them, or taped off the HBO, and I put the tape recorder up next to the speaker and recorded them, and I would just listen to those, and I had them memorized for a long time. Anyway, so I love the guy, and I still do. And so when this movie came out, I was interested. It's a very strange film, and Eddie says in one of the interviews that it was the best script he ever read, which I think is intriguing because, I don't know if it's the best film he's ever been in, and I also don't know what from the script was lost or not. But regardless, I think it's an interesting entry in his filmography, and one that people forget about a lot. Again, because it hasn't been on Blu-ray for one, but it says, again, newly remastered in 4K. Director Michael Ritchie, who I also love. Michael Ritchie did The Bad News Bears, and he did Smile, and oh man, I love his stuff, and I'm blanking on some of the bigger ones right now. So leave in the comments below all the Michael Ritchie movies I'm forgetting. Prime Cut, I love Prime Cut. Anyway, action comedy comes to Blu-ray for the first time. Eddie Murphy is the chosen one, a social worker on a madcap mission to find the Golden Child, a young boy possessing mystical powers. Joined by Key Nang, Charlotte Lewis, they'll battle the countless henchmen of Sardo Numspa, the mysterious and evil cult leader holding the boy captive. It's a dangerous quest, complete with obstacle courses and a mythical amulet, sharply combining Murphy's wit with eye-popping special effects and unforgettable adventure. And I think the other thing for me was, and I have always subconsciously, but more consciously lately, associated this film with Big Trouble in Little China, which is one of my favorite films, and a film that I saw when it came out in 1986, right around this time. I definitely saw this after, but I saw Big Trouble in Little China 2 days in a row in the theater, and it was just like mind-blowing to me. And So this movie has not only the mystical elements and the sort of fish out of water elements that I can tie to Big Trouble in Little China, but it also has James Hong and Victor Wong. So right away it feels like it has this kinship with those movies. And you have sort of a kind of a bumbling hero, you know, or a comedic hero. And one thing Michael Ritchie says in some of the features here is just how much humor Eddie injects into the movie. And so I started to think of it as a comedy when, you know, it is that, but it's not like laugh a minute like the last two I talked about, you know. It's a little more, you know, not drags between jokes, but just there aren't as many jokes, but they are very funny in parts. Just Eddie's reaction to stuff I've always loved. But yeah, just thinking about this as a double bill with Big Trouble in Little China, which I think I've done at some point, but I would recommend trying it. You know, it's definitely not as good by any means, but I was really kind of excited to get this one. And this, of course, is one of the Paramount Presents with the fold open there. On the disc. It has The Making of the Golden Child, The Chosen Ones, and Daggers, Design, and Demons. Chosen Ones is about 6 minutes 48 seconds, and that has interviews with Eddie Murphy, Michael Ritchie, and the writer. And then Daggers, Design, and Demons is about 6.5 minutes. And okay, so that's, I sort of screwed that up. The Making of the Golden Child is broken up into those two sections. So it's about 13 or 14 minutes of features on this. But it's, you know, nice to have anything. This is a movie where I hadn't seen a lot of archival interviews, and all the both pieces are cutting old archival interviews up into a new featurette. And so it's cool to see that stuff. I like archival interviews, especially as makings for new featurettes, you know, as opposed to the old press packet or, you know, EPK stuff. When they're re-edited, sometimes they're a little bit more interesting, and that was fun. But I just dug seeing this again, and the transfer also looks really good on this one. So if you're into mystical adventures, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, although not nearly as action-packed or as dark, although this has some dark moments, The Golden Child, worth a look. And last but not least, the first collaboration between John Landis and Eddie Murphy, Trading Places, from 1983. And this is a classic, you know, in its own right. It's, as Landis himself says, it's a Prince and the Pauper story. It's about two brothers played by Ralph Bellamy and Don Amici. And by the way, it was interesting in I don't think it's in the Filmmaker Focus, but in one of the featurettes, Landis speaks specifically to wanting to cast Ralph Bellamy and Don Amici and how he had to fight for that, and how, you know, he just loved both actors. And I think they're great as the Duke brothers in this, you know, sort of nefarious duo who decide to upend a man's life. You know, he's kind of a jerky guy, the Dan Aykroyd character, but they make a dollar bet that they have sort of a nurture versus nature argument that they are always going back and forth about, and Bellamy believes that they can bring in somebody else to do what Dan Aykroyd does, which he's sort of an investment advisor. They trade in commodities, futures, and then they sort of dump Dan Aykroyd. They get him framed, thrown in jail. He ends up stuck with a prostitute to help him out. That prostitute, of course, Jamie Lee Curtis, in a wonderful and delightful role. I love her in this movie. And then Eddie Murphy takes over in his spot, basically. And, you know, and it's sort of, there's a comeuppance, and it's very fun and very funny. And Eddie has great energy, and you can feel that he's excited about this new career, you know, this acting thing. He had done 48 Hours before this, but, you know, now he's sort of finding it even more, and yeah, he's just a superstar, and you can feel it. And he and Aykroyd are great together too. So a very fun movie. The new feature on this is the Filmmaker Focus, which is what they've done sometimes on the Paramount Presents, and it's about 8 minutes and 46 seconds. It's a new interview with John Landis. There's not a ton of new material that he doesn't cover in the Insider Trading, the making of Trading Places, which is an older featurette they've ported over. That's about 18 and a half minutes, and that has interviews with Aykroyd, Jamie Lee Curtis, Eddie Murphy. These are all archival, and Landis, and I feel like there's a couple, George Folsey Jr., and they have a lot of recollections about the film, and it seemed like a nice set, and like they had fun, and I don't know, but it's a good movie, and I think Landis talks about it being sort of like the script that is like one of the social comedy films of the 1930s, the kind of thing that Preston Sturges would do, back then, and the kind of movie that Don Amici himself might have starred in. Interestingly, he wouldn't have played the bad guy, which is one of the reasons Landis wanted to cast him as a bad guy. Is he'd not seen him in that role too much. And yeah, anyway, I guess it was originally developed maybe for Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor, but Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd, just outstanding, just great. Dan Aykroyd can play this sort of stuffy, uptight guy like so well, and his character ultimately doesn't necessarily learn anything. He's kind of a jerk at the beginning and jerk at the end, but he's a little more, I don't know, he's a little more learned in wiser, if you will. But this one was a lot of fun to revisit. Also looks good. As I said, both of these, it says newly remastered from a 4K film transfer under the supervision of Landis, and this one says newly remastered from a 4K film transfer. So 4 really good looking Eddie Murphy classics from the 80s, and they're all solid stuff from Paramount. I was really happy again to get a chance to revisit these. That's what we got there. So thanks to Paramount for sending these over. I highly recommend them. They will be out in a week or so's time, and all are worth getting, really. Definitely recommended. So thank you for watching, and like and subscribe and all that nice stuff. I'll talk to you guys later.